Hi everyone, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the second GTC webinar series. In today's webinar, we're going to be discussing the BRICS and the recent news about the inclusion of 6 different economies in the BRICS from early 2024. And we're going to be discussing specifically the BRICS reserve currency idea against the US dollar, because there's a lot of speculation, I would say unsubstantiated speculation, that the BRICS currency, should it be developed, might replace the US dollar. I'm going to show you why that's very much unlikely to be the case, and provide a bit of a history behind the US dollar as the world reserve currency, and also why the US dollar is the world reserve currency as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so before we start this webinar, I'm just going to read to you the disclaimer. This material that's going to be shown in this webinar is educational material, and it will not include any financial recommendations or advice. It's my own personal opinions on financial markets. It's my own personal opinions on what asset classes might be heading, and it's my own personal opinions on the information that I have. So if we read the disclaimer together, over the contract margin derivatives, including contracts for differences and spot foreign exchange, are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. You should consider whether you understand how these products work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing money. Independent financial advice and independent professional advice is highly recommended before investing. Again, this webinar is for educational purposes only. There are my personal recommendations and my personal opinions, and it's not for financial recommendations or advice. Okay, so who am I and why am I specifically interested in this topic? Well, I serve as the Chief Analyst at GTC. I have just over 10 years of experience in global financial assets. I cover asset classes such as world markets, FX, foreign exchange, emerging markets, gold, oil, and Bitcoin. My expert areas are actually in fundamental analysis, macro financial issues, and geopolitics. That's why I'm quite excited to have a different webinar topic today from more of an educational point of view, rather than day-to-day market analysis on financial markets trends for trading, because what we're talking about here now is much more on the geopolitical side, and is much more about the system behind financial markets rather than whether a particular asset might appreciate or depreciate in price. Okay, so what are we going to discuss today? We're looking specifically at the BRICS reserve currency against the US dollar. This is due to popular demand that we're looking at this specific topic, because there's been so much interest following the BRICS summit in South Africa at the end of summer 2023, just last month. There's been speculation that increasing the members of the BRICS, we'll discuss the origins of the BRICS in just a few moments, but increasing the members of this group could lead to a reserve currency. It could lead to a specific BRICS currency, and maybe speculation suggests that such a currency might be able to replace the US dollar. However, I think that this is very, very much unlikely. And this webinar will be used as an educational show to show why such a phenomenon is unlikely to begin. This is not the first time that we've seen speculation about the role of the US dollar as a reserve currency, as the major asset of financialization. And it's very difficult to say that the creation of a BRICS currency, it does not exist yet, why that would be the asset that would replace the US dollar. Again, we've been here before. The Chinese yuan was supposed to replace the US dollar. Before then, it was speculation over the euro. We've also had speculation that the likes of the Japanese yen in the past would be able to replace the US dollar. In fact, we've had such speculation for about half a century. Why are these themes important? Firstly, increasing the members of the BRICS does show increased political power and influence. And there has been a theory for many years that the world is turning into more of a multipolar world. By multipolar, we mean it's not just the United States as the central hegemonic power. I agree that these steps do show more light on this issue, that the US has less influence, the US has less political power. Certainly, if we look at the last couple of years in United States politics, there has been less influence and a different stance taken altogether. But we must decipher, by decipher I mean we must differentiate between political power and financial power. When it comes to the latter, which is financial power, the United States is as supreme and as dominant as ever, and this webinar will show how. Okay, so the history of the BRICS. How was it formed? In fact, it wasn't the BRICS initially, it was BRIC. BRICS standard for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And it was a term that was created in 2001 by Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill. In this report, in this publication, this economist was looking at the power of increased economic influence that Brazil, Russia, India, and China was having on the world. These economies were predicted to dominate global growth by the year 2050. In fact, as we've gone further in the last 20 years, we certainly see that these economies have become much more influential. Now, a few years later, BRIC became BRICS when South Africa was welcomed into the group. However, this move was also criticized, and it wouldn't surprise me if the decision to invite a number of different nations into this special group also receives some criticism. Why was South Africa being admitted into the group criticized? Well, at the time of the BRICS and the start, Brazil, Russia, India, and China were certainly dominating emerging market growth. But South Africa, on the other hand, is an economy that's underwhelmed and underperformed from its potential for a long time. In fact, perhaps some could argue that South Africa has never been able to perform economically as it should because of its own domestic and political issues around its economy, which continue to influence assets such as the South African rand, investor sentiment, and the overall performance of the economy. Now, the thought was at that time is that by welcoming a less economically powerful member into the group, that the BRICS would lose some influence. Some would say that's correct, some would say not. I would say that, look, 20 years past the term BRIC, BRICS is still talked about. So why is this webinar topic happening today? At the most recent BRICS summit in South Africa, invitations were extended to Iran, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates to join the BRICS. These economies are in line to join this special group by the 1st of January 2024. It is thought that with the inclusion of this dynamic group of economies, the BRICS will then account for nearly 40% of global GDP. In fact, it stands at roughly 36%. Just as impressively, this accounts for as much as 47% of the world population. Such increased influence of the group has led to a few different changes. Firstly, more concerns from the side of the United States losing its power as the central hegemonic power of the world. We do see less dominance of the United States in world affairs. For example, Saudi Arabia is taking quite a forward step. The likes of China is also taking a step into global affairs. We're definitely seeing less headline on just the United States. However, from a term of finance, we also now see expectations that the group will introduce a currency, the BRICS currency. Yes, on headline, the BRICS currency has some potential. However, another common currency that's widely used and known is the euro. And in the 20 years of the euro, there has been challenges. At one point, the euro nearly collapsed. For a currency to be developed, we need to have a central power within the BRICS that's able to provide liquidity to support the currency. How will that currency be traded? How will that currency be accessible? Who will provide liquidity to that currency? Such important facts are yet to be determined. There's speculation that it might be China that will take the leading role. Perhaps that's the case. However, the Chinese yuan is not even internationally accessible. It's not free floating. The People's Bank of China and the authorities in Beijing still keep very close grip on the currency. Let's say if the People's Bank of China or Beijing decided that they wanted the yuan to weaken or strengthen significantly. They have in the past influenced financial markets by intervening in the yuan. If such an event was to happen in the future, this would have a large-scale impact on the BRICS currency, not just in terms of its valuation, but also in terms of investor confidence. It's investor confidence in the US dollar that has kept the US dollar the world reserve currency for arguably as much as 100 years. We will talk about that in just a few moments. One of the issues at hand here is that headlines around media and so forth might be optimistic, excited, and bullish on the prospect of a BRICS currency, but they don't really understand what a reserve currency really is. And certainly they've underestimated and do not understand the dominance of US financial markets and the United States as a financial superpower. Let's look at the US dollar role as the world reserve currency. As just mentioned, the US dollar has been the world reserve currency for approximately 100 years. The reason why there is some debate behind this is because the records are not clear as to when exactly the United States overtook the British pound as a reserve currency. Some say it was before, during, or after World War II. For the sake of this argument, we're going to say at some point during World War II or after, most likely. Ever since then, with the creation of the IMF and the World Bank, many other political institutions also, the United States has taken the leading role of supplying the US dollar as the world reserve currency. However, speculation over its supposed demise, the destruction of the US dollar as the world reserve currency, has persisted since the 1970s. Again, there was speculation before that the Japanese yen might be the currency to replace the US dollar. The euro, we've more recently seen the Chinese yuan. This is not a story that we haven't seen before. Bitcoin was even speculated to be a challenger to the throne of the US dollar. However, on each occasion, such claims have not come to function. We haven't seen any challenge in the US dollar at all, if any. And we will show a few more evidence of such in just a couple of slides. So firstly, we don't even have a BRICS currency. To then say that a BRICS reserve currency could replace the US dollar, it's very hard to see how that could be any different to any other claims that have been made in the past in regards to a currency being able to replace the US dollar as the leading global currency. Now, let's look at how dominant the US dollar is, and it really is a dominant world reserve currency. For central bank reserves, the US dollar accounts for as much as 60% of global reserves. Yes, we can see from our chart and our slide that the dollar's standing has dipped. However, it's more than 3 times its nearest competitor, which in fact is the euro. One other currency that is speculated to at some point be able to replace the US dollar is the Chinese yuan. Yes, again, its share is growing, but it accounts for less than 5% of global reserves, which is less than 10% of the accumulation of the US dollar in global currency reserves. This is not the only metric where the US dollar is dominant. We also have to take into account the depth and liquidity of capital markets. Even though the United States might see a less dominant share in global GDP than before, certainly China's overtaken the US and catching up. But when it comes to global equity market capitalization, the United States accounts for as much as 46.2% of global equity markets. That is severe. Reason why that is so important as a statistic is because institutional investors, the banks, the corporates, the wealth funds, and so forth, have easy access to United States capital markets, equities, stocks, and so forth. This ease of access makes investors continue to go towards US capital markets. They are unrivaled in their depth. BRICS would then have to have its own stock markets, its own equity markets, its own capital index it doesn't even have a currency. So how would it be able to create all of these extra incentives for institutional investors to trust the currency when it doesn't even have the first steps that's needed? There's a very scientific and academic literature behind the US dollar as world reserve currency. It's very complex. And again, a currency that doesn't even exist yet, how can we talk about that replacing the US dollar when it does not even have its own capital markets? It's fantasy and it's not going to happen. Another factor that keeps investors going to the United States is the trust that investors have in the United States to provide liquidity and access. For example, the United States accounts for more than 3 times total debt that's available for investors than China and Japan. Government debt is also higher. Why is this important? Because investors can access these instruments as well. Perhaps the most powerful statistic of them all is the most recent one from the Bank of International Settlements, that the US dollar is involved in almost 90% of all foreign exchange transactions, and it accounts for 85% of transactions in spot, forward, and swap markets. Half of all global trade and 3/4 of Asia Pacific trade are denominated in US dollars. So when we're purchasing goods, importing and exporting, we are settling these claims in US dollars. This has nothing to do with the valuation of the US dollar, whether that's the dollar index at 90 or the dollar index at 110. It doesn't matter. We trust the dollar to pay for our goods and services. It's this exact same statistic which has ensured that the likes of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, when the argument was being raised that Bitcoin might be able to replace the US dollar as world reserve currency, why that's not been able to bear fruit either. And in fact, such claims have since diminished. It would not surprise me if in the years to come, the BRICS currency, should it be developed, it also sees its speculation quickly diminish, that it will be able to replace the US dollar as world reserve currency. So, collectively, we need to take into account how important the US dollar is and its role to capital markets. This has nothing to do with day-to-day trading, but it's very important to understand the literature, because to even have a conversation about reserve currency, you have to understand all the facts that surround this phenomenon. And it is a phenomenon because the US dollar now is as dominant as it's ever been before. For it to be on one side, 90% of all trades, is just incredible. And this is despite its political influence diminishing. So again, we see now why I say there's a difference between political power and financial superpower. And such statistics, such as the US dollar being trusted by central banks, institutions, it accounts for as much as 60% of global currency reserves, it sheds light on how powerful the US dollar is. When you have the United States accounting for as much as 46% of world equity market value, it's dominant. And this is despite its economic power also reducing. So again, political power, economic power, and financial power. 3 different forms of power, but on financial power level, any decrease in political power and economic power has not had any impact at all. on the United States and its currency, the greenback, the US dollar, remaining as the main financial superpower. So, you might ask why this matters for our trading. And in truth, it doesn't if it comes to trading strategies. What it might do is change how we look at financial markets in the decades to come. Perhaps a BRICS currency will not be invented until the end of this decade. And by the time it circulates, it will take even more from then. But we would need to see not only the formulation of a BRICS currency, we'd also need to see how that currency is circulated, who provides liquidity, how institutional investors will be able to access the currency, and the size and depth of capital markets. Would the BRICS have its own stock market? How would that work? How would you be able to invest in the stock market? How would you be able to access your money, transfer your money? That's a lot of a system that's not only not been developed, but it's a system that who would trust it? The United States, on a financial level, has the trust of all investors. That's why the US dollar has remained as dominant as it has for as much as arguably a century, despite all the changes in political circumstances, all the changes regarding social norms, technology trends, and so forth. It's as if that never happened as far as the US dollar is concerned, because it's as strong now as it's ever been. But there's still interest in this topic in terms of trading, and we can still use the US dollar for trading, and we can look for some potential trends for the US dollar over the final weeks and months of this year. Firstly, if we look at what happened last night at the US Federal Reserve, we have a challenging global economic environment right now. There's uncertainty over interest rate policy, there's uncertainty over inflationary pressures, there's uncertainty around potential of a world recession. I do think we were going to avoid one, but we're still going to have a period of slow growth for a long period. And the US Central Bank has raised interest rates aggressively over the past 1 year, just like we've seen other central banks, whether it's the Bank of England, the European central banks, banks in emerging markets. Everyone is lifting interest rates because of inflationary pressures. But the trading opportunities are clearly there that the United States and the Federal Reserve has been able to withstand high interest rate policy much better and stronger than its peers. We have economic divergence story that's growing. US economic data is very, very strong. Economic data from its peers is depressing. This is leading investors back towards the safety of the US dollar. Overnight, the US Central Bank kept its interest rate unchanged as it debates whether it has done enough to stabilize prices. However, the Fed did indicate that US interest rates might be increased one more time over the period of 2023, the remaining months. This has got investors excited, and we've seen a big shift higher in the US dollar over the past couple of days and weeks, based on economic strength in the US, which has pushed assets such as gold lower. The euro dollar to its lowest levels in months. The pound US dollar has really fallen to its lowest levels since early 2023 as well. If we look at the dollar index charts on the technical level, we clearly see uptrends in play. Higher highs and higher lows, higher highs and higher lows. When successive candlesticks of higher highs and higher lows break out on our charts, this shows an uptrend. If we look at the current candlestick of the US dollar index, we can see it's very close to challenging its highs from early 2023. Given the strength in the US dollar, the strength in the US currency, and more worryingly, the suffering of other economies. No matter where you go now, economies are suffering from a stronger dollar, as well as inflation pressures. Many currencies have hit their weakest levels in history. That the dollar should weaken for that situation to change. But the economic data for the United States shows that the United States economy can still handle higher interest rate increases. So that means despite all hopes that the US dollar would weaken, in fact, it's doing the opposite, it's strengthening. And I think that we could have a stronger US dollar all the way into next year, which means that we have a lot of opportunities for traders. One of which is the current pattern that's playing out on the pound US dollar. This chart is our pound US dollar on the daily time frame, and we can see a head and shoulders pattern. Left shoulder, right shoulder, head, neckline. Since we've fallen below our neckline, which is typically seen as a bearish pattern, the pound US dollar has fallen a number of 100 pips since. We still have lower lows and lower highs, which indicate that the pound US dollar still has even further to fall, despite the pound US dollar falling as much as 700 pips in just the past couple of months. One of the most exciting trades that traders are invested and really excited about right now is what's happening with the US dollar Japanese yen. It's no hidden secret at all that the Bank of Japan are very concerned about yen weakness. They have actively intervened in financial markets, given all speculation, to strengthen the currency. Just over 1 week ago, the Bank of Japan governor was very upbeat on interest rate policy. He provided hawkish comments that the Bank of Japan might need to increase interest rates in order to strengthen the currency. And we can see from our chart that the US dollar Japanese yen is now approaching its resistance zone, which is seen as a danger zone or an uncomfortable level for the Japanese yen, and where the currency can strengthen. That's if the Bank of Japan do choose to intervene. The likelihood is that they will, because of how concerned they are about currency weakness. So, this is an area that we can watch in financial markets. It's possible that traders and investors are going to be encouraged to enter selling orders into the market around this level. But we also watch and need to monitor how the Bank of Japan reacts. We know they want a stronger currency, but how are they going to achieve a stronger currency? Are they going to intervene in financial markets? Are they going to sell dollars? Are they going to buy Japanese yen? Are they going to increase interest rates? Or are they just going to warn investors through verbal intervention that we are not happy with the current weakness in our currency? All Japanese yen crosses, whether that's the Euro JPY, the Pound JPY, the Pound Yen, the Euro Yen, the Aussie Yen, AUD, JPY, they all offer opportunities for volatility. Of course, we also need to know to manage our risk. Another trend that we are seeing from the stronger US dollar is the substantial losses in gold over recent months. Since the gold price hit its milestone highs above $2,000 over the beginning of the summer months, we've seen the steady downtrend in gold. In fact, prices have declined as much as nearly $200 since the high. Now that we know that the US dollar remains so supported and purchased by investors, it would not surprise me if we see more investors encouraged to sell gold. In fact, if we look at our most recent candlesticks, we can see that the price is declining. It has declined today. Given the circumstances of a stronger US dollar, and a stronger US dollar for longer, the upside potential for gold prices is limited. We would need a signal to financial markets that we're going to have a weaker US dollar for a long period of time in order for investors to be able to be encouraged to buy gold and for gold prices to go back towards its milestone highs. At the moment, gold prices and its ceiling remains capped. It does appear that resistance for gold, stubborn resistance in fact, is somewhere around the 1950 level. Until then, it's going to be very difficult for gold to break this level, and we are more likely than not going to see further pull downs in prices, like we've seen over the past couple of trading sessions. Okay, in terms of the content for today, guys, that's it. I'm just going to open up the floor for a few questions. But before we go, I just want to wrap up and conclude what we have discussed today. So we've looked at the topic of the BRICS, how the BRICS was formed, how the BRICS has evolved from BRIC to BRICS, including South Africa, and the most recent developments about a number of different economies joining the group. At the same time, there is excitement that we might have a currency coming out of the BRICS, a specific backed BRICS currency. This has led to speculation that we might have the BRICS currency become the world reserve currency, which would mean it would need to replace the dollar. However, there's many problems here. Firstly, we've been here before, as we've discussed. This is not the first time we've seen the role of the US dollar questioned. At the same time, there's a large system, a mechanical system, behind the US dollar and the reserve currency. There's many challenges that a BRICS would have to come up with for solutions in order for a BRICS currency to become the BRICS reserve currency. Firstly, how is the currency accessible? How will the currency be backed? Who will provide liquidity? And then we have other aspects such as the size and depth of capital markets. The BRICS currency being used for trading, for physical goods, imports and exports, as well as the knowledge of how dominant the US dollar is. Central banks and institutions have a significant amount of trust in the US dollar. If it accounts for as much as 60% of global currency reserves and as much as 90% of forex trades. This is because they trust the currency. They know that they can access different capital markets. They know that they can access their money. These are a lot of challenges that any competitor will have to be able to succumb and oversee in order to have a challenge. No competitor to the US dollar has been able to do it. So why would the BRICS be any different? And I think that's how I will conclude this topic. What will the BRICS be able to do that is any different to the speculation we've had over recent years, as much as 50 years in fact? Do not forget how dominant the US dollar is now in day-to-day FX trading, the support the US dollar has because of what's happened in the global economic landscape, global financial markets. Dollar index is very close to 2023 highs and it's dominating against all assets. There's still a lot of trading opportunities away from the subject of the BRICS currency. And you're more than welcome to go on the GTC website to download the Global Trade Capital GTC platform to find out more about trading and to get in contact with us. That's it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for listening. I will now open up the floor to any questions, if any. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for watching and listening to this GTC webinar. We will be back again on Monday of next week for our latest week ahead. I wish all of you a wonderful evening. Take care and thank you for your time.